All right, welcome to another episode on the Joel Wright 2 channel. Today's video is part 2 of a presentation that my dad gave to the pilots of the 78th Fighter Squadron at Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina in October of 1997. He had been invited by the squadron to give an account of his combat experiences during the Korean War and the Vietnam War when he flew the F-104 and the F-105 respectively. Now this video, which is part 2, concentrates on his F-105 years. I've already published a part 1 of his presentation, which he concentrates on the F-104 in this video here, and I'll provide a link to that description below. It's in that part 1 video which I give a little bit of context and background as to why my dad was giving this talk in the first place. So before we get to the video, just a brief background on my dad's years in the F-105. He began flying the F-105 at the beginning of 1966 when he was sent to Nellis Air Force Base to get trained in the F-105. Then he was assigned to Kadena Air Base in Okinawa, where he was first assigned to the 12th Tactical Fighter Squadron, then the 67th Tactical Fighter Squadron, which he ended up commanding. Then he went up to the wing level, to the 18th Tactical Fighter Wing, to be the Assistant Deputy Commander of Operations. Then through most of 1969, he was deployed to Southeast Asia, to Thailand, to fly combat during the Vietnam War, at first with the 354th Tactical Fighter Squadron, and then later with the 357th Tactical Fighter Squadron. He completed 140 combat missions and then rotated out of Southeast Asia in January 1970. And at that point, he left F-105s for another assignment. All right, so with those details out of the way, let's get to the video.
Between Korea and Vietnam, I was running the 105 outfit in Okinawa, and we were keeping our 105s down in Southeast Asia. So we would send 15 pilots to Southeast Asia and keep 15 training, and we sat 3 nuke alerts. And so when at 60 days, whatever was left would come home, and then we'd send the other 15 down, and then resupply ourselves with pilots, train, and then 60 days later, down the switch. The first squadron I had, I lost 22 airplanes and 14 pilots in 6 months. And the second squadron I had, we disbanded that squadron. That was a 67 over in Okinawa. We disbanded that squadron, had to shut it down, send all that stuff to Air Force Archive. The second squadron I had was the 357th at Takhli AB, and I lost 14 airplanes and 9 pilots in 6 months. And so the loss rate was very high in Vietnam. Just to give you an idea, in 65 they lost 60 105s, in 66 they lost 111, 67 they lost 87, 68 34, and 69 14. By that time, the 105s were almost history. We lost 63% of all 105s that were in combat. If a 105 got to combat, not all of them did. Some of them were National Guard. We lost 63% of them. We lost 50% of all 105s that were built. They built 833 105s, and they finally sent them to the boneyard and the museum, so exactly half of them now. But the reason the losses were so heavy in Vietnam is that they only let us go in one way and come out one way. There was no variance every day. We were fueled on the same tanker, Arctic. We went to the same turn point. Went the same way in. If you read Thud reviews, Jack Rhodes is a real close friend of mine. I've flew with Jack for years. The 105 tactics were from 65 to 67. They tried. Remember, we ended Korea flying 16 ship formations at the most. So we started Vietnam with 16 ship formations, and they would lose 4 on almost every mission. So they slowly backed off. By the time I got there, we were down to 4 ship flights, and we were still losing number 4. You always put the FNG on number 4, and you move to 4 to 2 to 3 to lead if you survive. So by the time you were coming down on your dive bomb run, they had 4 figured out, and they could pretty well pick him off. The ground fire was I'd say light from 17,000 up, medium to heavy from 12,000 to 17,000, and unreal below 4,000. I mean, it was a guaranteed 100% hit if you got below 4,000. And our dive bomb runs, we'd go in at, we'd refuel, go in at about 10,000 roughly, carrying 750 pounders. And we'd be doing about 400 knots roughly. And just as you spotted your target, you'd pop the burner, climb to 17,000 feet, roll over, cut the burner, throw the brakes out, and start down. The 105 came down like an anvil. I mean, it would go to supersonic in a blink of an eye. But you couldn't drop supersonic because all your bombs would be unstable if they were supersonic. And so consequently, we had some 105s blow themselves right out of the sky. When they dropped, their bombs were armed and they hit together, and the 105 was above it when it went. So we tried to drop just above the speed of sound. We tried to drop, and then we bottom out at the speed of sound, pop the burner again, and go like crazy and run. My orders were 105 could not. It wasn't an airspeed fighter, although we shot down about. The 105 shot down about 25 MIGs roughly, maybe a little less. My orders, my guys were, don't engage him in. If he's in front of you and he's blocking your view at home, pull the trigger, shoot him down, and then see where at home is and get there. And the first time I met a MiG head on, I met a MiG-21 head on. I was at DMB and field bombing, and I bottomed out, and he passed me, and I threw so and hit the jettison button, pylons, weapons, everything. Broke and went after him. Since I got shot down by one, it was payback time. And I popped the burner since the 105 is probably the fastest airplane below 10,000 feet ever made. We could run up beyond supersonic speed in just a blink of an eye. We just went like crazy. And I knew the MiG couldn't go faster than 9.8. Because at past 9.8, they discovered that the MiG was turned into a cumulus cloud. And he couldn't see. And he just, when we had that half donut project, we got the MiG, we found out he just turned into a cumulus cloud. So he kept it below 9.8, and I chased him into downtown Hanoi. And just as I got a lock on him, I was ready to gun him. My raw gear just, I didn't have spokes in it. It just turned white. And at that point, I had missiles, anti-aircraft, everything going after me, and I just went ahead and broke and got the heck out of there, and my wingman broke with me. And unfortunately, we climbed to 29,000 feet, and we're discussing bailing out because we had no more fuel. Neither one of us. Fortunately for me, the tanker had heard all this discussion, and he came out of Laos, was running as fast as he could north, and we descended, and I pulled up underneath him and told him that EBL, emergency boom blast me real quick, and then going for the dive because I was going to flame out. And fortunately, I didn't flame out. Jack Groton did at one point on his flight, and he gave me 500 pounds real quick, and I moved off with my wingman and did 500, and I get back in and topped off, and he topped off in the morning. So I didn't do that again. That was the last time I tried that stuff. When I got home, there was a big sign sitting on the ramp. Don't ever engage a MiG unless it's blocking your view at home. They were waiting for me. I told them it's payback time. By the time I got there, it was four shifts. By the time I left, it was 2 shifts. You could get in and get out with 2 shifts. And we learned that from the Israelis. And you could go in there wide open, both of you pop, and both of you make your dive run and get out. The trouble is, if one was shot down, you had to stay there until CAP arrived, our rescue arrived. And your chances of coming out were probably about 50%. So I lost Jim White. He was Ed White's brother, who was the astronaut that died. I lost him on my wing, and I lost Hanley on my wing. And I had to stay with both of them. And I didn't have to, I did. And so I made 3 refuelings and 9 passes over Hanley, looking for him. And not even a photo recon airplane would follow me in and take a picture. There was so much anti-aircraft. They wanted to give me a Silver Star. And I told them I had a 2-seat 105 in the back seater. Jay Birchfield was later became a general. And I refused. They wanted to give him a Bronze Star, and I refused to take the Silver Star because they wouldn't give Jay Birchfield the Silver Star too. Jay was the one that kept me located. He was a navigator. He was a bear. We call it the Wawee. I was flying a Wawee airplane. follow a guy back seat for bear. And he was keeping me located and keeping me oriented and finding the tanker for me. And if I didn't have Jay, I wouldn't have been able to do half of that. So I just told him, heck with it. I won't take it all. I won't take anything if you won't give Jay that. I wasn't there for medals anyway. When we did the two-ship flights, we had no cap. By the way, the F-4s never capped us. Not never, rarely capped us. And the reason for that was that F-4 burned a heck of a lot of fuel, more than the F-105. And by the time we got there, they were ready to go home. And so we'd get there just as they stirred up everybody and got made them mad. And then we'd arrive there, and then everybody was ticked off that they lost their buddies, and they'd come after us. I don't have anything against F-4s or F-86s, except I'm glad I took strike business. I like strike flying. Let me show you the slides of Vietnam and North Korea. That's where they fighter ground stayed. Two to each trailer, shared a bathroom, and but I had it was a little rough for squadron commanders. We had to stay in that. As it should be. As it should be. We had our own dressing room. We had our own dressing room, our own dining room, living room, maid, and it was look. And that particular airplane is an L3. The pilot didn't, but the airplane did. This is my squadron, 357, and there's my party suit. You're yellow. Love my party suit. I got several colors. But that's my party suit for the 354. And that one's carrying 6 750-pounders, 2 fuse extenders, and 2 CBUs. My crew chiefs are all Texans. I was flying a Texas airplane. We had the state of Texas painted in my parking spot, and I always parked my airplane there. So it was called yellow Texas. They're putting the weapons on now with 750 fuse extenders. I didn't like dropping these because they were 3,000 pounds. And if they didn't come off, you couldn't come out of your dive. You went in with the bombs. And you had a fraction of a second to hit the Jetson button and blow the pylons. I mean, a fraction of a second. I just didn't like carrying them. When they went off, they looked like a small nuclear weapon. They had a mushroom cloud in them. It was awesome. And somehow or another, they kept fragging those things on us, and I didn't like it. We could only carry 2. That's why we have a centerline fuel tank. We could only carry 2 of those things. I just did not like them. They used those on the Gomer Bridge. When they blew the Gomer Bridge, that's what they used. And I don't know why I ever shook the bombs, because if one fell off, I would not know what to do. But I always went out there and shook those stupid things. I, to this day, have figured out how to do it. I carried 4 weapons with me. I carried a 25 caliber pistol in my boot. I carried a 38 caliber revolver in my synchronization was a chaps. I didn't like the test. I carried a Luger, 9mm Luger here, and I carried a 9mm Luger long barrel, 8-inch barrel Luger with 32 round snail drum strapped in the parachute. I carried enough ammunition that if I bailed out into the water, I'd go down like an anchor. That's my 100th mission, my 140th mission. And I'm not flying the Yellow Rose. The Yellow Rose had taken some hits, and I had to fly another squadron commander's airplane. And there we are taxiing out. He's got a bullpup. He's got 2 bullpups. I like the bullpups because you could guide them in. You could play with them. You could do rolls on the way into the target. You could fire them and do rolls. You could fire them and make a 90-degree turn and go get the guy over on the right instead of straight ahead. And the only trouble with the bullpup is that you had to follow it down. And of course, they could shoot into the bullpup's exhaust, and you're bound to be going through it. So there's the Weasel going out with his. Weasel's always got 1 strike airplane. You know, strike airplane carried the anti-radiation missiles also. That's me on my 140th mission up there, getting on. And they're arming CBUs right now. And that's a CBU. The last thing he saw, of course, was the chaplain giving me his blessing. I took a chaplain for a combat mission with me just to get him some appreciation for what we were doing. We could take anybody we wanted on a combat mission. Didn't matter. I've taken veterinarians, I've taken chaplains, I've taken army people. If they wanted to go on a combat mission with you, you're strapped in the back seat. If I yell, bail out, and you land in the, land and capture, it's your problem. I've taken just about everybody I can think of on a combat mission. If they were nuts enough to go, we take them. Now, that's me and my last mission I got to go. Off the burn and off the burn. RB-66s, they were the electronic jammers. They go up behind us and do all the jamming. Actually, they get up ahead of us while we were refueling. They were all up there. And we gave our cameras to each other, took pictures, so it really was. People asked me if I was afraid of combat. And the answer is truly, I'm serious. I've never been afraid of combat. I've enjoyed every minute of it. In fact, I was trying to get 200 missions in Korea, Vietnam, when they caught me. No one's ever survived 200 missions, and I was the squadron commander, so I was wiping my missions off the board. As they were logging them, I was wiping them off. And the IG caught me and grounded me and let me have one extra mission, so I had 139 when they grounded me. But I was trying to be the first one to make a 200. No one had ever made 200. Carl Richter was shot down and killed when he was 199. He was at my place 2 days before he was killed. So I was trying to beat Carl. And when Carl got shot down, they stopped it. And I'm through. If you got any questions, fine. I promised them 1 hour. And I started 1 hour and 1 minute. Anybody got anything?
You're generally tactical news, right?
Huh?
Tactical news. Who was the
I
guy that figured out
dropped a lot of news.
Dropped
Training. I've dropped an enormous amount. In 105 we had a bomb bay. 105 had a bomb bay, and we carried 1 megaton in the bomb bay. And you come screaming in at about 600 knots, and when you got 13 miles on the radar, you hit the pickle button, and you just held it down. And when the airplane was ready to pull, the airplane would pull into a 4G. The bomb bay would open, the bomb would come out, you would go the other way, roll out, burner, and wait for the. But when we scored our own bombs, because there's no way anybody's going to be range officer. I mean, you didn't know where that thing was going to go on 13 miles. So what we'd do is we'd pull up. When the bomb would go, we'd go upside down and follow the bomb, and just go down and make our own score. And naturally, our score was always great.
All right, so my dad mentioned a few other F-105 pilots in the video. I thought I'd take a minute to give a little background on those individuals. The first one he mentions is Jack Broughton. Broughton and my father flew together at Luke Air Force Base, Arizona in the mid-1950s in the F-84s. It was while at Luke that Broughton was also the second commander of the Air Force Thunderbirds. The Thunderbirds had formed at Luke Air Force Base originally before later moving to Nellis Air Force Base. Some years later, Broughton became a full colonel and was the vice commander of the 355th Fighter Wing in Thailand when he was famously court-martialed for allegedly violating the rules of engagement during a combat mission. Now, during the court-martial, he was actually acquitted of the most serious accusations, and he was essentially given a kind of a slap on the wrist, much to the anger of Air Force leadership, who, despite the results of the court-martial, relieved him of command and set him to do a do-nothing job at the Pentagon. He retired in 1968 as a colonel, and shortly after he retired, Broughton wrote a couple of pretty well-known books. My dad mentioned the first one. He's probably most well-known for Thud Ridge, but he also wrote a book called Going Downtown, and both books document his experiences flying the F-105 during the Vietnam War, and he's very critical about how the air war was fought. Colonel Broughton later passed away in 2014. The other pilot my dad mentions is Major Jim White. White was my dad's wingman on a mission on November 24th, 1969 into Laos. It was during that mission that White was shot down and killed. He was eventually declared missing in action, MIA, because although they had located the wreckage, they never were able to find any remains. It wasn't until 2017 that his remains were positively identified forensically. And in 2018, he was brought back home to be buried at West Point with his parents. His father was a Air Force Major General. As mentioned by my dad, Jim White's older brother was Ed White, a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force and an astronaut in the Gemini and Apollo programs. In fact, Ed White was the first American to do a spacewalk. Unfortunately, in January 1967, Ed White, along with Gus Grissom and Roger Chaffee, were all killed during a mission rehearsal for the Apollo 1 program. So quite tragically, Major General White had only two sons, Ed White and Jim White, and one was killed in the space program, one was killed in Vietnam in combat. Another pilot my dad mentions is Major Larry Hanley. Hanley was my dad's wingman on a mission on November 4th, 1969 into Laos when Hanley was shot down and killed. His remains could not be found during that time. And in fact, it wasn't until 2013 that his remains were positively identified and he was brought back home to be buried in his home in Washington State. And finally, we have Carl Richter, who was the youngest pilot to shoot down a MiG during the Vietnam War. Richter was on his 198th combat mission when he was shot down. He was actually rescued, but he was severely injured and actually died on the way to the hospital. He was only 24 years old. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.